Archetypes have been an important part of fighting games ever since they first gained a character select screen in Street Fighter 2. Even if you don't fully understand the idea of a Shoto, you probably know all about the more commonly discussed Grappler and Zoner. In the 30 plus years since Street Fighter 2, a lot has changed in fighting games, and way more archetypes have sprung up out the woodwork. In this series, I want to talk about the ones we don't really have strict definitions for, and pin down how they play, why you might play them, and most useful for you at home, how to play against them. In this episode, we're going to talk about one that cropped up a lot of mentions on the video about the bully archetype, the Brawler. The Brawler goes by many names: Pseudo-Grappler, Brute, Bruiser, Oppressive Character, Gorillas, Lockdown, Bulldozers, etc, etc. And those are just names that saw use in my bully videos comment section, but a lot of them arose from a bit of a misunderstanding that bully wasn't the same archetype as Brawler. And to understand the distinction between these and why I think there's a difference between the two archetypes, I want to do a cursory glance at the video game genre, Brawler. The singular biggest and most successful Brawler franchise of all time is the Batman Arkham series. They're known for a mix of their Batman simulation efforts and their incredibly fluid and free-flowing combat. To allow for this is a system that is quite literally called the free flow system. Batman will zip straight to an enemy with a very slight suggestion in their direction on the control stick while you're attacking. At higher levels of combo, Batman will travel further distances between attacks and even faster. So that means you can start using the movement from attacking instead of using just the game's parry button in order to evade attacks, and keep incredibly high combos going further and further. It's this Combat Magnetism that I think both defines the Arkham series and the Brawler archetype. Back to fighting games. A very huge deal has been made of this particular button, Sol Badguy. This button can essentially play the game for you in no uncertain terms. Sol travels far enough to hit at around the round start distance, and when blocked pushes you back a short enough distance you can simply hit the button again, and force the opponent to block again. And it's that command movement-esque property that I think defines these characters, their playstyle and this archetype. Now, for Sol, this isn't the only attack he has that does this, and that's important. Something I don't think I made a big enough deal of in previous archetype archives is that archetypes are verbs as much as they are adjectives. Characters can zone while not being zoners, as much as they can bully while not being bullies. So indeed, they can brawl without being brawlers. Archetypes are about what the congealed purpose behind the collection of moves and special moves a character has is. Why do they have these moves? What's the intended consequence of using these moves? How you decide to play them is separate from that, and we'll get to that further in this video and next week's Archetype Archive. What exactly is an archetype? But for now, let's look at Sol's other moves. Bandit Bringer, Bandit Revolver, Night Raid Vortex, Gunflame, Fafnir, and Wild Throw. Almost all of them move. Some move a little, some move a lot. Some are safe on block, some are punishable. But they pretty much all add to momentum and self-fulfilling pressure. If you were to only block Sol, after his very first blocked attack that he's done to you, he will always be able to do another active hitbox that closes the gap, zips him towards you and attacks simultaneously. Some of these, like Fafnir, are specifically designed to punish you for blocking in this scenario, but even while barrier blocked, Sol's never pushed out of range of attacking again, and that's what defines a brawler. How about another one, Nagoriyuki? Slash slash slash, spin, dash, DP, projectile, grab. Nagoriyuki has a big body, no dash, a bad jump. That's why his projectile cuts through literally anything, so he can close the gap behind it with his big normals and his command dash, and then start his looping, forward moving offense. Even if barrier blocked, he repeatedly gap closes, punishes you for blocking with his command grab, or he just does an insane amount of damage if he hits you normally. And just for further example, let's look at a character in another game in less detail. This is Susano. Susano is much more complicated than these characters, so I won't be quite as specific with him, but basically throughout a match he levels up. He gains new moves or new properties for existing moves, but again he uses huge advancing normals and looping pressure to enforce fear as to whether he just wants to continue attacking and doing high-low mix, or go for a grab once you've started respecting him. I imagine this should make the pressure of these guys fairly self-explanatory. They can infinitely rotate between options until either something works or the opponent calls out something specific. This draws in one of two playstyles and one of two reputations as a result. Some incredible players like Mochi play Sol in an extremely disciplined way, using their movement options to pressure with insanely precise spacing, and only doing things exactly when necessary. Or you get players who are much happier to play Gorilla, like Kazunoko, and have near constant active hitboxes and make yourself safe out of the raw fear you instill from how easily your character catches strays that can convert into strong combos. In lower ranks, you're much more likely to see people just pressing buttons, but that doesn't mean there isn't a lot of finesse behind this kind of play at a higher level, and that's something I'll cover in a video about the Gorilla strategy at a later date specifically. But in the meantime, whether it's the more disciplined, strategic kind of play, or the more flaily, overly active kind, how is it that you play against these guys? So first and foremost, and for the love of all that is holy, learn to barrier block. This applies to pretty much any anime game, but the extra pushback this provides means they have to use their less safe options to reclose the gap, or do something that you can avoid by escaping the corner to end their pressure. But if they try and reclose the gap, Bandit Revolver does offer a gross high-low throw mix if Roman cancelled, but that resource is extremely valuable for Sol, and if you guess correctly against it, it's put you in a very good position on defense. While the move is also punishable on block if not Roman cancelled, or with an anti-air move on prediction or an extremely good reaction. And similarly, something like Night Raid Vortex can be thrown or interrupted during its approach. So this still does mean that you have to guess between at least 3 options when he's closing the gap, and that's ignoring that Sol can just jump dash forward or do something like micro dash Fafnir, but that's the whole point of this archetype. How scary, confusing, and difficult to respond to this pressure is even from a distance. While his hitboxes ranged are technically only ever at his fists, the automated gap closing Sol provides is absolutely mortifying, and it effectively gives these characters the same sort of pressure that a rushdown character gets, but from a much further range that's much more difficult to actively read, defend, predict, or respond to. But that's why the main transferable skill against these guys is patience with your blocking and correctly using barrier if your game features it. You need these characters to be forced into using their unsafe, longest range tools, or else they will simply never be unsafe. Never is of course a slight exaggeration, but figuring out the widest openings you're going to get is imperative. The small openings are going to be your absolute best to punish once you're at an extremely high level of play, but by far, these characters are scariest to the worst players, and that's where this Gorilla reputation comes from. If you can't properly defend against their pressure, and you respect everything they do, they just get to press buttons against you infinitely. And this is what causes people to rage on Twitter that these characters are easy and brainless, when in reality there's ways to play Gorilla with an insane degree of finesse involved. But if you're a bad player, the amount of effort required from these guys to beat you significantly lessens. Patience is the key here, and knowing how to defend against these characters is the only way you're going to be able to play against them, because by right of the Brawler archetype and their innate gap closing, they're going to get in. There just isn't really a way around that. So you have to learn to defend. There's nothing else you can do, and if you do defend and you defend properly, that's when you're going to get all of your windows to attack back. And that's it for today's episode of Archetype Archive. As I mentioned briefly during the video, next week's episode is going to be on what an archetype is exactly, given there seems to be a lot of kerfuffle about the difference between archetypes and playstyles in the comment section, and I'd like to just clear things up, and it would be especially important for me to do that before this series moves any further forward. If you have any ideas for archetypes you'd like me to cover, or just some things I missed about brawlers, or even just a neutral skill you'd like me to talk about, you can leave a comment down below and I'll get back to you ASAP. I've been really loving the discussion, and we're getting into the point where I'm going to start doing either much more popular archetypes, like the set play character and things like that, or really niche characters, like trap characters for example. So things are going to spread out quite a lot from this point onwards, and I'd like to see what you guys like to see before I lock in and start making more content. Whether there's an archetype that you want to see covered, or if you're just interested in future content, liking and subscribing to the channel would be seriously appreciated. As you might expect, you can also follow me over on Twitch, Twitter, and join the Discord for updates on future content and streams live as they happen. That's going to be all for this video, and as always, I'm just going to leave you all by saying, stay safe.